Hello, my name is Igor Seletsky. I'm CEO and founder of CloudLinux, and today I'll present to you how and why we created LVE Stats2, how it is different from the old version of LVE Stats, and what to expect overall. Please ask any questions you would like. I'll answer to all of them at the end of the presentation. Let's start. So first, why did we even go and create LVE Stats v2? Why it's a big deal, and why it took us so long? So LVE Stats version 2 is a complete rewrite of first version of LVE Stats, and there is a number of reasons we went into such a major enterprise and did it. As we were growing and adding new features to CloudLinux, we were adding new limits, we wanted to monitor more and more things. We realized that our old code base is too difficult to modify and too difficult to maintain. Another reason was that we wanted everything to be more customizable, because we realized that different hosting companies have different approaches on how they analyze things, how they view things, and one size doesn't fit all. We also wanted to do a better job on data analysis. For example, today when we send notifications to administrators or end users that user is using too much and he needs to upgrade, we go to database, we scan data on disk, just to get those users that are using too much. And that requires a lot of resources, IO resources. It takes a lot of time, and that's why we cannot do it too frequently. It's a big deal and not efficiently written. With the new system, because everything is modular, because everything is a plugin, because everything can get the data from everything that was done before, it was very easy to write as a plugin that does this analysis of who abusers are as a plugin in memory, never touching the disk. So it's much faster, much better, much more flexible. Another example of this flexibility, customizability is plugin that uses the amount of memory that processes use instead of amount of memory that LVE reports for physical memory. And the difference is not that subtle, because LVE reports all the memory that processes uses, as well as caches and well, basically file system caches that account uses as well. But from end user standpoint, all end user wants to see is amount of memory that processes are used, because caches can be freed up automatically. And before it was a challenge to show, but with the new LVE Stats 2, it's very easy. It's a one plugin that just scans the amount of memory used by individual plugins and reports it there. So that's why we wanted to do. We wanted to make it easy to customize and do things in memory, do things faster. We also envisioned that LVE Stats will do much more in the future. It's a very powerful collection agent, and we can collect a lot of different data into it. We can load data like load averages, we can load data like available memory, and anything else we want, analyze it, and adjust settings for the LVEs or for the server overall based on that information. And we needed something for that. LVE Stats 2 is our way to go in that direction. So what else? Why else? What else was changed? One of the most important changes is that we now store data with 1 minute precision instead of 1 hour. Before, if you wanted to see particular instance in time that happened like yesterday, what you would see is that within that hour, customer was using 30% of CPU usage. But what does it really mean? It might mean that for 30% it was using all the CPU, 30% of that hour it was using all the CPU, and for the rest of the time it wasn't using much at all. And doesn't give you the information if the user ever hit the limit or not, and how it was partitioned, etc. With 1 minute interval, it gives you enough information to know exactly how the site is being used. Is it some spikes for a few minutes and then nothing, or is it constant load all the time? We are now able to give you exactly that information. Also, we are no longer showing the information about maximums. So before you would have limits, averages, and maximum. We no longer do that because it was too difficult to read. It was not clear how to read it. Plus, we don't see the point of it with 1 minute intervals. With this precision, you can see much better. You can get much better idea of how the usage was actually been. But because we store data now with 1 minute precision, there is much more data. So we decided not to store 2 months of data, and we're storing 1 month of data instead. So that's another major thing that we changed. Another thing that we changed is that charts are a little bit prettier, and the CPU and I/O charts will include database usage data as well. So you can actually see how much of that CPU usage was related to database versus everything else. Another very important thing is that for CPU and I/O, before there was no faults. We wouldn't consider anything a fault because there was no fault. We would throttle CPU usage, but we wouldn't consider it as something that breaks the software. Yet it created a lot of issues for figuring out when to react, what to do. Because with memory it was easy. If you see any kind of faults, errors, you know that you were limited on memory and you have to action it. But with CPU, especially because it's averaged over time, you don't know if you've ever been throttled. So now you do. Anytime you've been throttled, even once within a minute, we count it as a fault. So if you were throttled within 5 minutes for an hour, you will have 5 faults within that hour for CPU. And it makes it much easier to tell to the customer how many times was the customer throttled. You have the exact number to give to customers when explaining how much he was throttled within particular period of time. And we also started to collect snapshots. We were talking about it for a long time. We consider it one of the most important features that we released for quite some time. And the reason why is because we think it will decrease the amount of support you have to do. Quite often we heard that people come and ask the questions, but why did it happen? Okay, I was throttled, I was limited, but why? What was going on? And it's very hard to answer because something that happened 6 hours ago is definitely no longer on the server, and it's very hard to figure out why it was happening. So now what we do, we record informations on URLs that were hit, processes running, and queries running for that user anytime we record any fault. So as soon as there is a fault, right after that, we will start collecting this information, and we will present that information to the customer, and they will see exactly what was going on at the moment when we saw those faults. And we will collect it for each incident, and I will go into more details on those incidents in the future. But the customer can actually see, okay, those are the URLs that were hit, those are the sites that were hit, and that's the queries that were running, and they can do at least something. Or maybe they cannot do something, but maybe you will be able to do something about it, because it's still a challenge. Even if you know what was going on the server, it's still a challenge to do something about optimizing the software or resolving the issue, but it does give you the baseline information to start your digging. Okay, so we talked about what have changed. I also want to make sure that I talked about what didn't. And it's fairly important thing because we don't want to break your stuff. We spent a lot of time to make sure that we don't break any customizations that people might have done. So out of the box, everything should be backward compatible as much as possible. We spent a lot of time to make all the options backwards compatible, the output backward compatible, and we are planning to run with this backward compatibility mode for at least next 12 months, and then we will decide and slowly start propagating it into new mode. And the reason we want to switch to the new mode is because it has much saner input and options and output. It's much easier. It's easier to read. It's easier to manage. It's easier to use. But for now, you can use the old format, and people who need to use old format after this 12 months can still do it either by specifying the parameter -m or by specifying that they want to use old format in configuration file. What else stays the same? So we still have LVE info and LVE chart commands, and all the options should work the same. We still have var LVE info file. It's still populated the same way. It's the same format. So if you have any customizations, they should work. We do prefer that you test it while it's still in beta, but it's not going to be in beta for much longer. So make sure that if you have customized anything at all or use it in some way, test it with a new version, because soon it will propagate to all the servers. We added a bunch of new options to existing commands. So for example, LVE info has ability to query database government statistics. It can output data into CSV or JSON format. It has time units information. It can query multiple servers. It can substitute blank values for something else. And this was needed for some integrations, for control panel integrations in particular. Database governor from LVE info can give you also JSON format and different other parameters. We modified LVE chart, and I touched it before, so now you can generate LVE chart in PNG and SVG format. SVG format is new and it's a default one, but the main change is that we have made the charts prettier, and that we have added database usage information into those charts. We also removed the maximum, as I told before, and the precision of the charts is much higher, simply because we now have 1 minute intervals and not 1 hour intervals for the charts. So the charts will now be much more jiggery. They will go back and forth much more, simply because it's much more representative of actual usage of customers than it was when you would average it over an hour period. We added a new command. We added several of them, but the first one is CloudLinux top. It's a replacement of LVE top. The idea is to provide the information of what's going on with the server right now. It outputs the data in JSON format. We use it extensively for cPanel, direct admin, and Plesk integration. And it gives a lot of information about what's going on. So all the statistics about current usage, all the database statistics, user statistics, all will be there and will be accessible to you once the new user interface comes out for LVE Manager. It has a bunch of options, like you can filter by different things like username, domains. You can paginate by how many entries do you want to see. You can hide or show database information. All that available, and the idea is once again to make it easy for you to integrate if you want to, but most of you won't need it. You'll just see it in the new user interface once it comes out later in this month. Well, later in December. Few other commands is db governor charts, LVE create database, LVE read snapshots. They're mostly commands for you if you want to integrate, pull data out of our system in some other way. So what stays the same as well is that we can support SQLite, Postgres, MySQL, and MariaDB. By default, it's still SQLite. Postgres, MariaDB, and MySQL are mostly for central databases. Also, all data for SQLite databases. So if you use standard configuration, single server reporting for LVE Stats, all the data will be automatically migrated from the old database into the new database. It will be done within the first 24 hours. So once the new package for LVE Stats comes in, you might see that users have no data, you have no data about historical usage, but within 24 hours, all the data should be propagated. We didn't do it in one chunk because it basically goes through 2 gigabytes of data on some of the servers, and it's too much of a load on the system. So we split it in a small chunks, and we're doing it in a small intervals. If you're using central database, it will not be migrated automatically. We just don't have a lot of people using central databases. Plus, it was a challenge. If someone really wants to do it, we can help you do it. It's possible to do. But on the other hand, in a day, you already will have a day history. So unless you're extensively using it, it will get populated fairly soon anyway. So some of the important files you should know about regarding LVE Stats2. The database for SQLite is stored in var LVE Stats2 that database. It's similar to how it was before, just the name changed. Var LVE info is the same as before. Var LVE CloudLinux top JSON, that's the JSON file that CloudLinux top is using for the output. You can use this file directly, or you can use CloudLinux top command to access this file. If you're using this file directly, make sure you use the same, you do advisory locking on this file, because otherwise you can get partially written files. A little bit more on config files. So the configs are stored in etc sysconfig. The main config file is LVE Stats2, and it has, I'll go into more details about it. And we have the directory LVE Stats.config that has individual config files for each plugin. Once again, we'll go into a little bit more details on it later on. So main config file, the same information as before plus a little bit more. So database type, standard server ID, same as before. Mode directs what options and output to use for LVE info command. Should we use backward compatible V1 mode or the new V2 mode when we're outputting data, and how we parse the options. Plugins is a directory where we get all the plugins. So if you need to add your own plugin, either put it in this directory or link it to this directory. We recommend linking, and I'll go into it in more details. And we have a parameter how many days of history to keep. So default is 30. You can increase it, but be careful because it's a lot of data. Now about the configurations files for plugins. Once again, most of the times you don't need to configure it or change it, and soon new user interface will have ability to configure all those standard plugins like notification plugin. But if you are managing fleet of servers and you want to make a configuration change for something like that, that's the files you want to change and propagate across your servers. We do send pretty much the same notification messages, but they have a little bit more data. We can pinpoint things better because we know exactly when CPU and I/O was throttled, stuff like that. But the idea is the same, that part didn't change much. Snapshot Saver configurations, that's the plugin that does snapshots, and this you might want to tune or not. So the idea is that we take snapshots when something happens. Something happens, we call it an incident, is when we have a fault. But the way we figure out when the incident stopped is when we don't have any faults for some time. So by default, it's 300 seconds. So if for 5 minutes, 300 seconds, there was no faults, and then there is a fault again, we will consider it a new incident. But on the other hand, if there is a incident every 3 minutes for 5 days, all those 5 days it will be considered as a single incident, and we will take only 10 snapshots for all the time. And we take only 2 snapshots per minute for those incidents. And you can change those parameters. For example, you might want to decide that you want to judge an incident with a smaller period of time between them, or you might want to collect 50 snapshots per incident. It's up to you. Just remember that incident might have quite a lot of data, so if you collect a lot of them, it will be a lot of them, and we store the data for 30 days. So all the incidents across all the customers for 30 days will be stored, and it might accumulate a lot of data as well. What else? Plugins. So this is more for those who do want to extend the functionality of LVE Stats, but LVE Stats was made to be extended. And the heart of it is plugins infrastructure. The plugins are written in Python. They're very simple. They're easy to write. It should not be a big deal to write it, and we're willing to help you write it when you need help. We do separate them into 4 pieces: collectors, analyzers, persisters, notifiers, but in reality, there is no difference in how you write them from that perspective. It's more of a logical separation than anything else. And we have generic plugins that we include by default, plus 2 optional plugins right now. There is going to be more in the future that we package. So we did those optional just to see just how flexible architecture is. So first one is LVE Destroyer. For the customers who run more than 5,000 users per server, there was a problem where it actually starts to, each LVE takes a little bit of memory, but once it's 5,000 or more, it starts to use up more and more memory. And people wanted to destroy LVEs that are no longer being used for some time. And before it was done by a separate script that was fairly complex. Now we're doing it using plugin, and instead of 300-400 lines of code, it's only like, I think, 40 lines of code. It's much shorter code, much easier code to write, and it's much easier system overall to do very simple code. So this is one plugin. The other plugin is a collector type of a plugin that collects the amount of memory used by processes, sums it up, and substitutes the physical memory usage in the statistics from the one collected by LVE to the one collected from the processes. So this is our way to show that yes, you can do a lot of different things, plus providing useful plugins at the same time. But we do expect to we will write more plugins, and we expect other people to write those some plugins. Some of the plugins that we are thinking about are burstable limits. We have people asking for them all the time. We don't really want to do them. We really don't want to do burstable limits, but we do want to, and we will not enable it by default, but we do want to let people experiment. Each plugin has a fixed properties like period and order, plus any other settings you might find necessary. And here's the list of plugins that we have today, and as you can see, it's a lot, and it's just the first page. everything that was done by LVE Stats 1 is now done by plugin. Absolutely all the data collection, data notification, data storing, absolutely everything is done by plugin, and we're able to separate it into small chunks that lets us substitute them or replace them and make things easier. And it will make it easier for you to replace them and customize them as well. Here's another one, so you can see things like LVE collector, plugins that collect the information about LVE usage, and then there is LVE usage analyzer that takes the data that was collected by LVE collector and analyzes it and does something with it. Then there is a file saver that saves that same information to the disk. So it's like chaining of those small things, but each of them can be replaced, disabled, removed, etc. Two optional plugins at the end, all very simple, very straightforward to do. So when you want to enable one of the optional plugins, all you do -s location of the plugin to user share LVE Stats plugins. If it's your plugin, you do pretty much the same. You write the plugin and then you link it into that directory, restart LVE Stats, and it will pick up that plugin. Here's an example of what plugin would look like. So this plugin was supposed to watch the size of a particular file. Just an example. That's basically it, all the code. Here's your very simple, trivial plugin. Half of the code is comments, so should be fairly easy. There is some conventions, and it's all documented on our website as well. There is some conventions that all plugins use. Those are the variables that are accessible to all plugins, and this is how we share the data. So for example, stats is a dictionary that contains the information about LVE usage for the current second. And all our plugins that modifies what physical usage, how physical memory usage is counted, all it does, it changes the data in the statistics package. And this way, everything else will piggyback on the same data, just a little bit modified based on some other way we want to calculate this data. And that's what allows for a lot of flexibility. The stack technology for plugins is Python 2.7 and SQL Alchemy. We do use other technologies, but you basically don't need to know anything else. And if you don't touch database, you don't need to know SQL Alchemy. All you need to know is Python. But we do use a lot of other stuff. We use one of the important things that I want to mention is that we use Sentry. It allows us to get errors from the LVE Stats as soon as they happen, even without you reporting them. So we do get a lot of feedback from our beta testers today without them even knowing that there is an issue. There is some issues that otherwise wouldn't be visible. They're now visible to us, and it lets us resolve a lot of hidden errors that otherwise would be much harder to resolve. This is basically it. Now it's time for questions. Let me see. So question number 1, with 1 minute interval, where is the analytical data stored and how much space is consumed on a server with, let's say, 300 accounts? All the data is stored for a month in a database, like SQLite database. With 300 accounts, I think you should expect somewhere around half a gigabyte of data generated within 1 month period. It shouldn't be that too much. Basically, I think we are at about 1.2 gigabytes of data for a typical server with 1,000 accounts. Of course, it really depends on the usage patterns, because if the account hasn't been triggered within that minute, we will not write anything for that account. So the more activity on the server, the more accounts are being used, the more data we have to write, the more data we have to store. Okay, next question. With all the information that is now being recorded, when there is a fault, does this affect the performance on the server in general? Yeah, you're now logging more data, which is extremely helpful. But what is the impact? So there was some trade-offs that we made, but there should be no impact. At least we couldn't see the impact on our beta testers, and we had quite a few of them. We were logging data once a minute before as well. We weren't just storing it all the time. What we were doing we were compacting it. So we would store the data, then every few minutes we would compact it into 5 minutes intervals and 15 minutes intervals and 1 hour intervals. And as a result, we were doing a lot of data processing that now we will not be doing at all. Also, while we are saving a little bit more data because we have more fields, we actually have less data to save, because before we would save both averages and maximums. Now we don't save maximum parameter anymore at all, so we're saving 1/3 of the data in total. So you should see drop in I/O activity, not increase comparing to the previous version. Okay, another question. So you are converting your own SQLite now to MySQL MariaDB of the server. Does it mean that more load on DB server? Does this mean if DB goes down, stats go down? No, we're still using SQLite. Nothing has changed from that perspective. It's all the same as it was before. When will version 2 be available, and will my servers automatically get it? I think we will release it next week, so that's our target. There might be something extremely urgent popping out that we say, okay, we still cannot release it, and we will delay it by another week to fix it, or 2 weeks at most, but it will be released this quarter for sure. When it is released, it will get updated on all the servers. It's just typical YAM update, RPM updates that your servers run automatically anyway. So yes, you'll get it automatically. Are plugins free? Well, all the plugins we do are free. We will be creating a lot of optional plugins that we're also planning to release as a free extension. Maybe there is going to be companies that decide to do commercial versions of plugins that they will sell. I don't know. We haven't thought about it that far. It's possible. But the plugins that we are planning to offer will be free. Plesk extension will be updated in launch date of LVE Tune. No, so because LVE Stats is fully backwards compatible, we are not planning to update everything at the same time. So we will first release LVE Stats 2, then later, but still within this quarter, we should release new user interface for cPanel and probably Plesk and Direct Admin that uses a lot of functionality of LVE Stats 2, but it's going to be beta, and in Q1 I expect it to go in production for all Plesk, Direct Admin, and cPanel. Does LVE Stats 2 limits database for users by default? Well, if you mean database size, then no, we don't limit database size by default. If you mean if we limit CPU and I/O, once again, it's not by default. You have to enable database governor. But once you enable database governor, yes, a database will be limited by the same limits, and you'll see how it is limited in LVE Stats 2 VA charts. So LVE Stats actually doesn't change how limits are applied. All it does change is how you can view the usage of the limits and application of the limits. But it's just a viewer, your way to see your window into what's actually going on in the system without affecting the system by itself. With those changes to LVE Stats 2, are there ability to pull data via API to integrate inside another portal? Not via cPanel API, but as you've seen, all the tools are now extended to output the data in JSON format. So it should be very easy to just use command line interface like SSH -X, the command you want to write, and get the data back in JSON or CSV and use that. We are providing JSON output exactly to make it extremely simple to integrate with any tool chains that you have. Consuming JSON format should be trivial. And we don't do like REST API because that's another endpoint to secure, and we don't want you to worry about it. So it should be fairly simple to just expose it as a CGI commands or something. Will you release plugins that provide a framework for burstable resources, or should I start learning Python? Probably within 3 months we will release this plugin. The question is, we will provide the user interface to see, manage, and update it. I don't know. It will depend, but we do plan to create this plugin so that people can start tinkering with it. Does LVE Stats itself requires more CPU and memory for its working? That's a good question. Probably it does require a bit more than LVE Stats Fun, but it wasn't noticeable enough. But for overall system, because notifications are now not going into database, I would say that overall load on the system should be less, not more. About migration from LV1 to LV2, the migration time contemplates the number of user accounts. For example, if we have 2,500 accounts, the 24 hours is approximate time. Is it the same time? Yeah, most likely you will see longer time. So our typical amount of users is about 1,000, and for them it takes about 12 hours. Typically, I mean, it's all on average, because if a lot of those accounts are not active, you will see a lot of zeros. For 2,500 accounts, you should probably expect like 36 hours or something like that. But it's not limited. It will just go through it in a short bursts, trying to migrate all that data. Do you have any plans for the network limits? Bandwidth per IP, connections per IP inside CloudLinux. We actually have bandwidth limits for CloudLinux 6 kernel. We are still debating if we should port it to CloudLinux 7 kernel, because no one took it up before. If you are interested, write our support. We will explain how to configure it, but it was already available. Just that no one, when we did the beta, even the people who asked us to do it decided not to use it because it wasn't really necessary. But bandwidth limits are already here. Is there a minimum kernel version requirements? No. It works with all existing kernels. Will kernel care users who have not rebooted for a long time need to reboot when LVE Stats to released? No, there is no need. It should be backward compatible to all kernel versions. Is there potential to log too much snapshot data in a shared hosting environment where CPU could be limited, throttled often? That's a good question. We haven't seen it happening. Given that we're recording only 2 snapshots per minute and no more than 10 snapshots per incident, I would say no. But if we see it, we will limit it. Also, snapshots itself are stored as individual files, not in database, which makes it all less database intense, I/O intense. We use Cloudflare to protect our Plesk panel. We noticed that LV usage graphs did not show. This will be fixed in Plesk extension for LV2. I think you're having some other issue. I don't think it's related to Cloudflare, so I would recommend you contacting support and they'll fix it, because that's not the issue. If you don't see LV usage graphics, it's not because Cloudflare or because of extension or version 2, it's something else is going on. Not related to LVE Stats2, but are there going to be any major improvements on database governor? Can you advise if many of your customers are using it in commercial environment? So today, database governor is used by half of the customers, and majorities of feedback is good. We're thinking of switching it from advisory mode to always on mode. at some point of time, but I don't know when. If you have any issues with MySQL Governor and how it works, I would love to hear it. What are the issues? Because we don't get many complaints regarding it, even though that 50% of our customer base has deployed it. How will there be an option that when user gets his limits hit to be notified like once a week or so, custom setup on next day, and not like administrator that gets notified once or twice a day or so? Thank you. So we did enhance the notification plugin. I don't think we made it so that you can get notified once a week instead of once a day, but we have a site cloudlinux.uservoice.com. Please go there and submit it as a request. It's easy for us to add, and we would love to add more features into LVE Stats2. Now that we're coming out of release for it, we will have a team that before was doing it, being able to work on adjusting and adding more features and collecting more interesting data and doing better stuff for LVE Stats. So it's a good feature to ask for and good timing to ask for. Is it possible to change the email and content of the notifier are sending? Yes, it's fully customizable. I believe you can specify email, content, from email, and even locale. You can send it in different locales. Yes, the content of the email is fully customizable by you, and we do expect you to customize it because those emails should be used for upsell. Using the cPanel, will the default settings allow users to see snapshot data? Yes. So as soon as you upgrade to LVE Stats2, your users will have a way to see snapshots. Will LVE Stats record users' most executed queries in Maria and MySQL? No, it wouldn't, but it's something to once again request as a new feature for LVE Stats2. If enough people, I honestly speaking don't know why would you want to have most executed queries, why it's important thing, but yeah, we can do it. It should not be a problem, just need to understand a bit more why. Will snapshots be only generated if some limits are reached? Yes, that's correct. We will only generate snapshots when user hits some kind of limit. And the reason is simply because if it will start generating snapshots for all the users all the time, it will take so much data space that it's just not practical. Do you have plans to allow more snapshots for LVE per certain user in order to log more for just a single user in order to allow us to investigate problems with that particular user? I like the idea. Please submit it as a feature request. Something I think we should do. Makes perfect sense. Will LVE Stats2 make it easier to set database governor limits for users, similar to CPU and RAM limits? LVE Stats2 will not make it easier, but new user interface that will be in beta this quarter will make it significantly easier. So all the database governor functionality will be controlled through user interface, and you'll be able to adjust and manage it on the fly with this. With the ability to store data in MariaDB, does this introduce LVE Stats database clustering, and could this database be used to read data to present to customers? Yes, of course. So if you're not familiar, we had it in LVE Stats 1 as well. You could write the data from all your servers, from multiple servers, into a central database, and then use it however you want it. And mostly we've seen the usage for it from customers who have 550 or more servers, but even there we see only slight usage, maybe like 10 customers total who are using it, and they're using it differently. But the idea is that you can store the data on a central server from all your servers, and then either query it from one single server or write your own queries and query directly bypassing our tools and going directly after that data. These emails, will they be sent out using SMTPs that we can configure or rely on SendMail? So we rely on the same mechanisms that Control Panel relies. So typically it's SendMail. not SMTP settings. I don't know if it's good or bad, to be honest, but we didn't have this issue before. It's the same notification settings as the same framework for sending out emails as today with notifications enabled. Does LVE Stats able to collect all usage details properly in real time, or it halts when the server is getting CPU abuse? Well, because the CPU is abused by CPU abuse should be limited by LVE, it should always have enough CPU to collect the data, and it typically doesn't, is not that resource intensive. But if for some reason it has to skip some period because there is not enough CPU or not enough I/O for it to run, it's not a big deal. You'll just have a hole for that particular time, but later on it will get back to normal. Can you please explain also if Optimum Cache is used by your big customers and what is the feedback? So for now, we don't recommend using Optimum Cache. We know that it helps only like 15% of our customers once we started to use it for big enough. And while it can be tuned to work well, it requires a lot of enhancements from us to make it work. We plan to start working on it again in Q2 of 2017, but for now, just don't use it. Well, I think it's a good time to finish. Thank you very much for everyone who came to listen. I hope that LVE Stats2 will let us do much more to serve you better. That's our goal. We do look at it as our entry into next step of CloudLinux, something to add much more smartness to CloudLinux. If before CloudLinux was pretty dumb, it would just apply the limits and that's it. Now we should be able to make it much more configurable, much more reactive, much more intelligent in how it deals with the limits, with the server settings, with the performance optimization and other things. And LVE Stats2 is a framework for that. Thank you very much. Have a good day. Thank you.